Hello everyone, welcome to chapter 7. In this chapter, we are actually going to continue with our risk management topic, but now that we have identified the risk, now we are going to talk about how to control the risk. So let's start with our learning objectives. So after you complete this material, you should be able to recognize some of the strategy options that are being used to control risk. And also you should be prepared to select from them when given background information. Also, you have to be able to evaluate the risk control and using a formula to develop the cost-benefit analysis. Also, you should be able to explain how to maintain and perpetuate risk controls. Also, at the end, you will be able to describe some of the popular strategies that are being used in the industry to be able to manage the risk. So to keep up with the competition, a lot of companies, they should design and create a safe environment in which the business processes can function. In this environment, we must actually maintain confidentiality of our information and privacy, and also making sure that the integrity and availability of those information and the data in the organization is there. These objectives are being met via the application of the principle of risk management. So controlling risk starts with understanding of what is risk mitigation strategies and how we can formulate those strategies. Now let's look at some of the risk control strategies. So a company can choose one of 5 basic strategies to be able to control and manage the risk in the company. One of them is to be able to defend itself, applying safeguards that can eliminate or reduce the remaining uncontrolled risk. Second, the company should be able to transference the risk. What does that mean? Meaning it shifts the risk to other area or other outside entities. Mitigation of risk. What does that mean? That means reducing the impact to information asset should an attacker successfully exploit a vulnerability. Acceptance, meaning that you understand the consequences of choosing to leave a risk uncontrolled. And then you acknowledge that the risk will remain until you apply a control to it. And then determination means you can remove or disconnect the information asset from the company. Now let's look at each of these risk control strategies. Let's talk about the defense. The defense risk control strategy that attempts to eliminate or reduce any remaining uncontrolled risk through applying additional control and safeguard, also known as avoidance strategy. So this approach also, we can call it sometimes the avoidance strategy. There are 3 common methods of risk defense. One of them is application of the policies. The second one is application of training and education. And the last one is implementation of the technology. So we talked about the policy in chapter 4. That application of policy allowed all the people who are in the management to be able to make sure that the certain procedures are always being followed. So for example, maybe a company needs to control password. They need to make sure that they control it more tightly, and they need to develop a policy that requires password change maybe every 3 months on all the IT system. But policy alone, it cannot be enough. You need to always have effective management and making sure that you are actually making the changes in the policy, and also educating your employees and using the technology that's out there. So in terms of application of training and education, that means you need to do some awareness. You need to making sure that the people in the organization are aware of the potential threats, and also you should do some training in order to create a safer and more controlled environment. In terms of implementation of technology, there are a lot of organizations that actually provide you with a lot of policy and documentation, but also you can actually apply certain things such as firewall, maybe the administrator, they can deploy the new firewall and then also develop a policy to follow that as well. So that goes hand in hand with developing the policy. So the second strategy is transparency risk control strategy. In this, what does this mean? That means we are going to shift risk to another entity. The goal of this to be able to accomplish by rethinking how services are being offered. Also, we can basically revise some of the deployment models, and maybe we can purchase insurance or implement service contract with providers. So sometimes the firm, they might not have the experience or they might not have a security management experience. They should actually hire an individual or some firms to provide the expertise, and in those areas that means they are going to outsource that part. In order to have an effective transparent risk control strategy, we need to have an effective service level agreement, or what we call it in the organization is called the SLA. In some circumstances, an SLA is the only guarantee that an external organization can implement the level of security that the client organization wants for their valued assets. The FDIC, which is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporations, suggests that organizations use some of these following 4 steps to create a successful SLA. The first step is to determine the objectives. They need to review the strategic business need of the institution, including evaluating the day-to-day operation, the risk factors, and the market condition. The second step is to define the requirements. They need to be able to identify the operational objectives by improving operating efficiency, reducing costs, or maybe basically helping enhancing the security. Also, the third step is to setting measurements or some sort of a metrics, measure and confirm that the necessary service levels have been achieved and the objective and strategic intents have also been met. And also establishing accountability is the last step. So it is helpful to develop and adopt a framework that is making sure that it has the accountability after those metrics have been clearly identified. But of course, when you outsource your risk, it's not without its own risk either. So it's basically up to the owner of the information assets, or maybe the IT management, or maybe the information security team, to making sure that the requirements of the outsourcing contract are basically sufficient enough, and basically they have been met of what is needed for them in order to have this type of service level agreement established. The next strategy is mitigation strategy, and basically is the mitigation strategy is the control approach that attempts to reduce by means of planning, preparation, the damage caused by a realized incident or maybe some sort of a disaster. So this kind of approach has 3 types of plan. Basically, you can develop a disaster recovery plan, maybe this incident response plan, and also business continuity, which most of the organization, they actually develop this. So they need to have some sort of a mitigation strategy in order to develop a risk control management in the company. Mitigation depends upon the ability to detect and respond to an attack as quickly as possible. This table here basically summarizes these 3 types of mitigation plan that we talked about. So we have disaster recovery, incident response, and business continuity. So you have a description of each of them, so what they are, and basically an example of it. So For example, for the incident response team, in terms of an attack that can happen, or maybe a disaster all of a sudden that can deploy, some of the example could be list of steps to be taken during an incident, what the company needs to do, what are the steps, and also gather some intelligence about that attack and analyze the information to find out how you can control it. Disaster recovery plan, basically the example of that would be you need to develop some sort of a procedure for the recovery of lost data. Also, you need to have some sort of a procedure in order to establish the loss of technology infrastructure and services, and also some sort of a plan for how to shut down. Maybe sometimes you need to shut down the system in order to protect the system from that attack. Business continuity, you need to also develop some sort of a plan, and it needs to state some of the steps in order to how to activate maybe another data center. Maybe you need to develop another server somewhere across the country or something like that. And also what are the critical business functions that you want to continue as soon as possible in that location. Another strategy is acceptance. Another strategy is acceptance risk control strategy, in which the decision to do nothing to protect an information asset from the risk. And basically to accept the outcome if you have lost something or, as a result of an attack. Sometimes unconscious acceptance of risk is not a valid approach to risk control, but you need to kind of make a conscious decision making in your business. So the company that decide on accepting a strategy for every identified risk of loss may in fact be unable to conduct proactive security activities, and it can have an apathetic approach to security in general. Sometimes acceptance is recognized as a valid strategy only when the company determines the level of risk posed to the information asset, or maybe assess the probability of the attack and the likelihood of successful exploitation of the vulnerability, or maybe estimate that the potential damage or loss that could result from an attack. And another valid strategy could be evaluate potential control using each appropriate type of feasibility, or maybe perform a true risk assessment including financial analysis, also determining that the cost to the control the risk to a particular function or a service or information asset don't justify the cost of implementing and maintaining the control. Maybe it's better to just accept it because it could cost much more and it's just something that's not feasible in the company. Another, the last strategy is basically termination. It's also like acceptance. The termination risk management is based on the organization need or choice as well, not to protect an asset. However, the organization doesn't wish the information asset to remain at risk, and so it removes it from the environment. So basically, they just maybe remove that software, or maybe because the risk could be so high, they could remove a software, or maybe they could just terminate that type of infrastructure that they have. So the cost of protecting an asset may outweigh its value, or it may be too difficult, or maybe it could be very expensive to protect an asset compared to the value or advantage that asset could bring for the company. In either case, you need to also make a conscious business decision if you are using this strategy, and not just simply abandoning your asset, which are maybe very important for you. So basically, you need to make a decision. If that asset is not a value for you at all, and if you think you're going to spend a lot of money protecting that asset and that asset is not a value for you, maybe you can just terminate that. That could be very feasible.